Alright, so right now, if you're given such a structure, this is kind of how the table looks like. You have the date column on one, and then you have the second column, but this is the score, and then this is the cumulative. Now this can get a little bit long, right? It could get a little long because the entry keeps coming in, and each entry will add a new row to this table. What if we want to create a rolling sum and maybe have that group by date, right? So we want to have a rolling sum of this column, but grouped by weeks of this. So we want to have, like, say this is the 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So let's say this forms week 7 of 2022. We want to have a number that represents the sum of our scores for this 1 week. Then we move on. This is maybe week number 10, this is week number 11, this is week number 12, and we want to have one score for each of them. So let me show you the outcome, let me show you the output of that, and maybe leave a minute for you to go ahead and think about how you would achieve this. So this is what we want to have, right? 10, this is week 10. This is actually the ISO week, right? The ISO week refers to what week of the year would that be. So this is the week number of the year. So this is week 10 of 2022, week 11 of 2022, week 12 of 2022. And the score is basically just the sum of that. So you can do a real quick calculation here. Let's take a look at the most recent one, 14. That's 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 1. So 2, 4, 5 plus 5, 10 plus 4, 14. So this 14 here is the sum of what happened on week number 13, right? ISO week number 13. So if you go back up, that's 26. Let's take a look at that. 0, 6, 6 plus 1, 7 plus 2, 9 plus 5, 14 plus 5, 19 plus 7, 26. So that's that. And cumulative is really just kind of the same logic as we've done before. So 56, then week 11, that's 33 plus 56, that's 89 plus 26, that's 115 plus 14, that's 129. Right? Given this, let's call this x. Given x, how would you go to this? And this, let's call this y. How would you go about that? All right? So here the idea is to create a rolling sum grouped by the weeks, but the ISO week. So if you're very used to the pandas way of thinking, you'll probably think about something like, okay, let me just say pandas as PD, and you would probably have something like pd.group by. You want to group by the week itself. So in this case, it's date. You want to group by date, and then you would say something like try to find the rolling. You'll probably try and say 7 days to do the sum of that. This is not going to give you what you want, because first of all, if you group by date, the date itself are all unique values. So there's nothing to group by here because they're not even the same value. This would probably be meaningful if you actually have like 3, 9 of March, 9 of March, 9 of March, and you want to actually group them and then sum. Then you say, what about rolling? Now, just even do this. Let me tell you what this will achieve for you, right? This is actually going to just probably, if this even work at all, it's just going to sum up every 7 rows. It's just going to give you the sum of every 7 rows. They're not actually going to be the meaningful ISO week number that we actually want here. Right, so this is probably not the right way to go about that. Some of you think about what if we just use pandas pivot table, something like pivot table, something like this, and then you have to pass in a df. So let's say we have a df, we don't have a df, so let's just pretend we have one by calling data frame, and we just have this, and then you have the columns equals to what, gonna leave something in here, and then you have the index equals to what. You're probably gonna try something like this. Probably also not going to work, but I'm going to tell you, like, these are things that you probably would think about trying. You may also think about trying something like this, and then later on you have something like resample, and you resample the day, and you say that sample this by day or by week, and then you try and do something like the sum, and then you add your rolling like this. And all of this will still probably not work. Right, so now the question is, before we show you how the pandas way of doing it, the whole theme of this series is to show you how not to do it with pandas first, to show you how to do it in vanilla Python first. So that's probably the, you know, where we're going to start. And if we have time, we can talk about the panda solution. If not, we can talk about that in a separate video, in a future video. But how do we go from this to this? How do we do that? Okay, to maybe help you out, I'm going to just show you how this structure is even created in the first place. Okay, how is this represented in Python in the first place? So let me create a new terminal here, and I'm just going to go Python, just go in here, and let me just make this really clear. This is what we have now, right? How is this represented in Python? Well, let me show you. This is what we have. It needs a date time, so let's do that. Now we do that again. Right, so now we have x. Okay, let me show you what this is. Right, just copy this out a little bit. Just copy that, paste this in. You probably want to import date time as well, so I'll do that. Okay, and we're not gonna have to, we don't want to have all of this. We're just gonna try and maybe keep it a little bit tinier to have it a little bit cleaner, and that's about it, right? So we have this as X, and we know that. And what do we want? We want to get to TQ-W. We want to get to this. So how would this look like? Now this is the Y, right? This is the X. This is the Y. How do we get from X to Y? That's the question, right? How do we get from X like this to Y? And the Y is just the rolling sum grouped by week. So each ISO week itself should have a rolling sum of that without using pandas, because pandas would make it probably very easy. So how do we think about this? So let's go ahead and take a look at Y, and let's just create the same representation up here. So we're gonna have this, and instead we don't have this anymore. We're just gonna copy this here, but we're gonna change the values within it. So instead of date time, we actually want to have ISO week. So maybe week 1, so week 10, we want to have week 11, and want to have week 12. Okay, and this would just be the sum of that value and the sum of that value. So remember that this is actually probably makes more sense to put it in here. This is how it looks like. This is the ISO week number, and this is the sum, the rolling sum, and this is the cumulative. Right? So how do you get from X to Y? So going back into Python, let's take a look at X. This is what we have now, X. So let's see what is a good strategy for this. Now a good strategy here is to think about if we could find a way to have all of these individual dates be changed. For example, going from here, let me just add a comment here, into an ISO week. Let's say week 1, or week 5, or week 10, or week 20. It can go up to week 52, right? 52 weeks in a year. So let's say week 36, for example. But this is March, so it's very unlikely to be that. It's probably likely to be week 10. How do we go from that? Because then we can also do the same thing, and then let's say this also goes to week 10, this goes to week 10, but then when it goes to 12, it goes to week 11. So really what we want to do is to find a way to have that first. And this could be a function. And luckily for us in Python, that it is already provided to us. So if we were to copy this, let me show you what I'm going to do. Just copy that, paste it in here. I can just go ahead and say ISO date. And there is no such a thing called ISO date. So what we need is this ISO calendar. So let's do that. It's in here. ISO calendar. It's going to return 3 different values in here. So kind of a tuple with 3 different values. So the first one is ISO year, ISO week number, and the last one is ISO weekday. So weekday meaning the day of the week, right? This doesn't mean the month. You may be thinking, okay, this is a 9th of March, so this must mean the month. This is not the month. This is the weekday. All right. So let's put a note here to say that if we were to take this and we call ISO calendar, it's going to return 3 values. What is it going to return? It's going to return the ISO year. In this case, 2022, that's the ISO year. And then it's going to have the ISO week number. In this case, this is the 10th week of this year. And then it would have the ISO weekday. So this is the Wednesday of all days, right? Wednesday of all days, all right? So we are going to actually make use of that function. And another technique we're going to be using, let me clear all of the screen. Another technique that we're going to be using is actually the groupby function that we learned before. Okay, to get started with groupby, we want to import that. So let's go ahead, just say from itertools, import groupby. We've done that before in the earlier videos, and we have X. So that is still X. So just to print that out, that's X. This is it. So it's a list of all of this, right? We don't need all of that. We just probably want to have maybe the first 3 of them. Just like that. We want to get to Y. Okay. We probably want to have this be transformed into this first. So this is a post. Whoops. Probably want to use the pound sign. Post transformation. Post pre-processing. Pre-processing. ISO week number. So this let's just maybe just do a quick check again, right? So I have a datetime.date.today. That's today's date. That's the time that I'm making this video. Okay, that's 3rd of April. If I say .isocalendar, it's give me the ISO year, ISO week number, and ISO day number. So that's the day. So this is a Sunday, right? 7 is a Sunday, right? Now let me just take the second value. That's going to be 13. So I actually want this to be a 13, right? I want to have this something like this. So probably like 10, probably like 10. And then when it comes to today's date, it's going to be 13, right? So I want to have this. I want to get to from this point of X to this point of X. I actually want to convert that. So let's clear that out again, right? Now, group by. Let's actually bring group by in our terminal as well. So let's say from itertools, import group by, right? And this is how we do it, okay? We say group by. Group by what? We want to group by X. This is the one we want to group by, okay? It's going to ask you, okay, there are 1 item, 2 items, 3 items. There's 3 of them. So there's the date, there's the score, there's the cumulative. Which one should be the key? You need a key here, right? So you need a key. Do you want to group by this, or group by this? So you can say something like group by key equals to, and key equals to this. And you can select this to be the group by key. So you can say something like lambda x 0. But this is not going to work because there is nothing to group by here because they are all individual values. They are all unique values. 9 of March, 10 of March, 11 of March, they are unique values. There's nothing to group by. So a meaningful group by would be something like if you have something where you have, let's say, okay. If you have something like gender, male, female, all right, you have male, and you have 25, and then you have single, whatever, right? Or let's say income, 10,000 per month. You change that. Now you have female, and you have 19. Now this is meaningful to group by because you can actually, they're not unique values. You can say group by the male. So you can say in this case group by the male, and then something like this, gender or whatever, you know, gender, or group by the first key, you know, whatever. But in this case here, this is meaningful. This is not meaningful. This is meaningful. You can actually group by that. You can even group by maybe social class, for example, or job or occupation, nationality. That makes sense. If we take that away, these don't make sense though, because we don't actually have that. So what we want is we want to have take this, transform them into something like that, because now it makes sense again, because now we can do group by all the week numbers of 10 and then do a sum of that. All right. Well, so how exactly do we do that? That's the ISO calendar. So we actually seen this function earlier, so we're gonna say that. And what do we want? We want the week. All right. So remember that ISO is gonna return the year, ISO year, week, and a weekday. So we don't want none of them. We only want a middle one. We only want a second element. So let's go ahead and say take the first index, which is the second element. So this is gonna extract only the weekday, which it could be 10, it could be 11, it could be 13, but it could be any of this. And it says take that should be the key and group them. So when you do a group by, you pass in the data, you pass in a key, and it's going to return 2 things, right? It's going to return K and G. So let's put this into a list comprehension like this. Like I said, K, G in group by. And we can do something with this KG, right? We could do something like for K, comma G. K stands for key, G stands for groups, right? So K refers to the key. What is the key? This is the key. And what about G? G is the groups, all right? So within this, we can even have a sublist. Why am I creating a sublist here? Well, because I want to go from this to this. So what is this that I want to create? I want to actually create something like this. I want to say something like week 10. What is the total here? So total is 8 plus 8. Let's say 16. Then I want to have something like this. And I want to say 13 here, right? So I want to put 13 in here. What is the sum of that? 1 plus 1 plus 1. That's going to be 3. I want to do something like this. So I know that this is going to be an element, a list with exactly a length of 2. So 2 elements, right? The earlier part, the first part here, this is simple enough because this is basically just the key. This is basically just a key, right? Key equals to take the ISO calendar, take the first element. This is exactly that. So I'm just going to just say K. And that would be simple enough. But G, this is what we did. We say 16. How do we get 16? Well, we take the sum of this second, this area here, right? So how do we do that? Well, we can say something like take the sum And now we can do v1, v stands for value for v in g. All right, so for kg in groupby. All right, so that's about it. Let's run the whole code. Now we get 10, 56, 11, 33, 12, 26, 13, 14. Right, cool. That's exactly what we want. So now that we have that, we can actually have the actual numbers. Just put in here so that we can maybe have that as a reference. So we're gonna change this. This is actually gonna be 11. This is gonna be 12. This is gonna be 26. Right. Okay, so we've done the first part. What next? Now, what next is we actually want to have this y. Maybe we call it z now. Whoops. The autocomplete sometimes drives me nuts, but right, 3. What we want now is we want to actually take each of this and append another value. We don't know what that other value is, but we want to append this value. So we want this to be like in this form, because then we can go back to G shell, and then we could do something like TQ dash week, and it would give us that 10, 56, and then the 56. So let's maybe pause here a second. What do we need here? Well, first we need to think about if this is the first situation, like where this is index 0, we need this to just be the same as this. Okay, so just take this and fit that value here and just pad that. But if this is not index 0, this is index 1, what happened? Now you should take 33 plus whatever value that is in here. What about this one? You should take whatever value is in here plus 26. So 26 plus whatever value in here. So here in this case here, 33 plus 56, 89. 26 plus 89, 115. 14 plus 115, 129. All right, that's what we want. Can we get there? So let's go back to Python. How do we go about doing this? So let me show you what. Let me just refresh your memory by show you what a loop is. We also kind of need to actually copy all of this, right? Paste this in, right? And just paste that in. No, that would be that. Okay, so that would be just be X. All right, cool. Let me just refresh your memory. What is a list? Okay, so if I have this and I said for I in X, print I, it's just gonna iterate through that, right? You say, okay, there are 4 elements. So the first element, second element, third element, fourth element. So for I in X, it's gonna just do that, right? This is a simple for loop. This is probably something you learn in first class in Python, but let's clear the screen out. Well, turns out maybe something that you may have seen, may have not have seen. This is something like you can do something where you can have an extra index returned to you if you would do something like enumerate. Okay, so when you say enumerate, earlier we say something like for I in X, and then you say print X, print I. You did something like this, right? Cool. But you can also say something like enumerate. And what enumerate would do is that you would return an index. So in this case here, I'm not going to call it I anymore. I'm going to call it list. Okay, but I can add an index up here. So for I, comma L in enumerate. If I continue to print out L, you will see exactly the same results. We're just ignoring the I. It's exactly the same, but enumerate would actually return and say, okay, for each iteration, I'm going to return also the index on top of the value of the list. So this is the same here, except that there's an index. So if I were to change that a little bit now, instead of printing L, I'm printing I. Now I see 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's the index. So every time it runs, that's going to give you the I, right? Okay, so that's the index. That's the index of the loop. That's the list. That's the result of this enumerate. So why is this interesting? Because we can now take a look at the X, and we can say, what if we just enumerate through that, and for each time we enumerate that, we just have to add a value in here. All right, so the first value in here is just going to be the same as this value. So let's maybe write that out, and we say for I dash L in enumerate X. Okay, so that's going to enumerate through this. And what do we say? If this is just the first row, there's nothing to add. There's nothing to add. Just gonna take the second value and just append that. So we need an append. So let's go ahead and say if I equals to 0, we say L, because L is now going to refer to this. Okay, L is going to refer to this. So if I say L dot append, then this is the equivalent of saying take 10, 56 dot append. If I append 20, then it's just going to lead to this result. All right, so I want to say append what exactly? Well, if this is just 0, then it just append the second value. So 0, 1. Okay, so let's do that. Say L1. But what if it's not? Okay, so I know that I've covered this case, so let's write that. But what if it's not? What if it's actually not 0? What if it's this row? What if this is this row? What should happen then? Let's write that out. Say else. What do we want to append? We still want to append something. If we don't append something, it's just going to be a list of 2 that's not going to be able to, that's not what we want. It's not going to give us this result. We want something in here, all right? So we want to actually append a value in here. But what exactly do we append? So we want to say append this value. And what is this value? This value is actually just going to be something like take the 33 plus 56. What does that mean? It means take the second element. So let's write that out. Let's see, L1. That will give us the second element. But that's not all. We still want to add something. But this something happened to be an index minus 0. It happens to be the earlier list, right? So you want to add the value in the earlier list. So you want to say x and I is going to be this. I minus 1 is going to go up one index. So when I say I minus 1, okay, I minus 1 have 3 values, 0, 1, 2. Which one do you want to add? This, right? The last value. So what do we do here? We say 2. And that is basically just going to do it. So this is going to say, okay, in this case, 33 plus the earlier list, which is here. Oh, 2, index 2. So that's the last element, 0, 1, 2. That's 56. I'm going to say 56. And it's going to compute that, and it's going to append this to a list. Right, so this is what we want. Let's run enter. Now let's print out x. And there we have it. I think this is correct. 56, 89, 115, 129. Take a look, do a quick sanity check. It's exactly correct, right? So that's what we want. Let's take a look at how to incorporate these changes in our projects. So let me move my screen a little bit. I'm going to change this also to Live OS. And I'm not going to need the demo.py. I'm going to close that out. We can string this up a little bit. Have this change here. In fact, I'm also going to delete demo.py because we don't need that, just completely for demo purposes. But alright, let me zoom out and show you what I have in main.py. So in main.py, what we did was to add another argument here, -w, that stands for weekly. So now if you run tq, you're going to get this results here. But if you run tq with a w flag like this, you're going to get the weekly breakdown. So weekly breakdown is just a rolling sum for each of the ISO week itself, right? So you don't want to see the whole thing, you just want to see it maybe on a weekly basis. So that's the add argument, that's what it's doing. And from here, once you've done that, you need to clearly act on this information, right? So this is called weekly. So where do we put this in? We put this in here, weekly. We add another argument in here. We say that when we call the score accum, make sure that we pass this weekly equals to args.weekly. So that's the next thing we want to do, because otherwise there's no point trying to just receive this argument and do nothing about that. So we want to have weekly, then pass this into score accum. Now where is score accum? Let's see. Score accum is in taskquant.score.accum. So taskquant.score.accum. This is where we find score accum. And you want to find score underscore accum. So let's do that. This is it. So what we need to do here on this end is we want to actually also receive this weekly, because otherwise there's no point trying to pass this in, because this is not an accepted, this is not an argument that I recognize. So I want to pass weekly in here as well. I'm going to give it a default value of false. And so if somebody passed in with a -w like this is going to turn it into true, and that is going to fit into this function and going to call score accum with weekly equals to true. All right. Then within score accum itself, all of the code still stays the same except for this line, 126 to 146. This is the only part that is changed, that has been changed. All right. So you added another 20 lines of code that says if weekly. So if the weekly flag is true, then what happened? Well, then take combine L and then perform what we see up there, which is what we spent the first half of the video talking about that. So this is the combine, this is the group by, and then this is the k sum. Then from there we just add the third element so that we have the cumulative. And finally I changed the headers to be week number instead of date. So the earlier one is date, week number. You can also make an argument that this could be its own function. Just take it out, make it a unit function itself, and within it just maybe change date to week number and do that, and so you don't have to repeat this both twice. But here, since it's so trivial, I didn't really care about doing that, but you can do that, right? So combine our headers, that's that. But really this is the main chunk of the code here that gives us that magic. All right, so we have 126 line to 126 to 137 lines of code. That's kind of where the changes are being made. And the next thing left to do is to write tests. So I'm going to open up TaskQuant, and I'm going to weave through it real quick. And there we go, 8 tasks all pass. So this is really just the same as what we've done in terminal. We just have to bring that back into the accum. We just have to bring that back into the task accum.py, but really the code is kind of what we've done already in the terminal. We just have to bring that back into the script. So what we did was we just created the combine L. We just have some sort of dummy here, and then within it we said, okay, from here, once you have the data, create rolling sum. But where did this create weekly rolling sum comes from? Well, that is from this file, accum.py. What we did was we export out that function into its own unique function called create weekly rolling sum. It says if you give me X, I'm going to return X to you after I did all of this pre-processing. So now at the bottom, we can keep our function a little bit more modular, a little bit more tinier, and it just says, okay, if weekly, then just perform all of this logic, right? And we can also just test for this particular logic. We said if we do that, then we should expect this result. Do we have that result? If you don't want to do it this way, you could go ahead and maybe do some manual calculation. You could maybe have like the first one plus the second, and you can do all your sum in here, and you can do it that way as well. But we already verified that just now while we're doing the exercise, so I'm just going to keep it this way. So when you run Python m unit test, you should test that all of this still works. Every time you add new feature, you want to make sure your test still works. Everything should still pass. That when you add new features, you're not breaking any of the earlier tests in here. All right. So that's kind of it. That's how we added a new feature, created a new feature, and then make sure that's also reflected in your main.py, because otherwise no one can actually add the W flag in there. So you want to make sure that that's there. One thing about outparse is that you can actually have something that takes both W and V, for example. So that would just create that is just the same as the -W-V. So these are the same, but you can also just combine them and say -W-V. You can also just have the multiple path. You can have a path, and then you can have a verbose in there as well. So none of this should break. All of this should still work, and the way you have that kind of assurance is to make sure that you write proper tests for every new feature that you added, and make sure that all of those tests pass before you incorporate them. And that's all I have time for today. I'm gonna see you in the next video. Thank you for joining me.